Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This morning I want to do a quick, short little video on different projectiles and different manufacturers and ballistic coefficients and what they mean and how good they really are as it pertains to the 1 mile shot with the 308. And then I'm going to add a little more in there with my future plans for this. But first, when we went out and shot, we started at 1,230 yards, okay? And so we're going to talk about this Hornady. This is the 208 grain ELD match. And from the way that I have these set up, I'm running these at a muzzle velocity of 2,400 feet per second, okay? And so based on Hornady's G1 ballistic coefficient, because in my experience I've been using G1 for as long as I've been long range shooting, at least for the past 4 or 5 years, and I really have not seen that it's been any better in my experience to use G7. Your mileage may vary. You may be really into G7, but I use G1 and I just tweak it a little when I go back and re-input some field information from when I've been out shooting. Okay, so the way I make my charts, I've got some different information here. Like I know the sonic barrier at that range with this particular bullet on this particular day at the altitude I'm at and the temperature and everything. So at 1,230 yards, to get on target, of course, this drop chart is in 100-yard increments, and we're in between the 1,200 and 1,300. So we can do some quick interpolation and figure out exactly how much it's supposed to be, according to this ballistic calculation. And the way you would do that is you would take, all right, your 1,300 is 54.6 minutes of angle, and you would subtract your 1,200, which is 46.9, and you would get a difference of 7.7 MOA. And what you would do is, okay, that's the full difference of the 100 yards there, 7.7 MOA. So we're looking for 1,230. So what we can do is we can multiply 7.7 by 0.3, and we would get 2.31 MOA. Or we could take 7.7, multiply it by 0.7, and get 5.39. So I may have just lost you there, but the reason why is because 1,230 is 30% more, 30% between 1,200 and 1,300. You've got a 100-yard deal there, and you're looking for 1,230 is 30% of that difference of the 7.7. On the opposite end, it's 70% from 1,300 to 1,200, so it's a 70% difference going the other direction. All right, so if you do, and this works out either way, the math works out perfectly either way. So you could do it one way or the other, it doesn't really matter. So you could do that, you could add 2.31 to your 46.9, and you would get 49.2 MOA is your drop for 1,230. Or you could subtract the 70% difference, which would be 5.39, and you would get 49.2 MOA. So it works out either way. It's perfect. This is how interpolation works. If you don't know the exact, you don't have the ballistic calculation for the exact yard, you can interpolate between two different yardages, and that's how I do it. But so we're supposed to be at 49.2, right? That's what it's supposed to take to get this 208 grain bullet to 1,230 yards. Well, that's not exactly how that worked out, because I kept shooting and I was hitting low and low and low every time. I ended up needing 56 minutes to get this bullet to 1,230 yards and finally hit the target. Okay? Based on its ballistic coefficient and the velocity I'm running, I needed 56 minutes to get there. Well, that's a difference of 6.8 more MOA than what it should have taken. And this is an issue that I've had with Hornady bullets ever since I've been using them. I mean, they're fine if you're only shooting 500 yards or something, but when you really stretch them out there, you know, once you're really starting to near, especially when you're getting close to that sonic barrier, they start having some serious issues. And I don't think the ballistic coefficient of Hornady bullets is as high as what they claim, because every time I've had the same issue where I've always needed more elevation than what the ballistic calculator has shown. And I've shot some burger bullets too, and they've kind of been the same way, but not nearly this bad. You know, at this distance with a burger, I might need another 3 MOA or something. So, yeah, you know, 6.8 minutes of angle off is significant. That's a lot. You don't want to have to deal with that. 6.8 minutes at 1,200 plus yards. You know, you're thinking, if you're just doing some rough math, that's 6.8 times 12. What is that? 70, well, let's call it 72 times 12. Or, say 7.2 times 12 would be, or sorry, 7 times 12. What would that be? 84 inches, you know, we're talking 84 inches low is what we're talking. So at that distance, you know, we're talking 7 feet low at that distance. You're going to miss your target by 7 feet using Hornady's ballistic coefficient. At least in this case. Now let's get switched over to looking at the Warner Flatline and how well it performed. Alright, so now we're talking about the Warner Tool Company. This is the 180 grain Flatline FTR bullet. So, based on the G1 ballistic coefficient that I could get for it, and the muzzle velocity that I'm running, and on, you know, at the temperature and altitude I was at when I tested them. And this is an important thing too, these bullets were tested on the same day, relatively the same time, when I recorded the muzzle velocities for both of them. And then, you know, I use those muzzle velocities with the altitude that I was at and generated my drop chart for each one of them. So now we're going to look at this Warner Tool Company Flatline. So one thing you're going to notice here that's significantly different from the Hornady is my sonic barrier is at 1,640 yards with the 180 grain, running about 2,560 feet per second, whereas with the Hornady it's 1,284 yards with the 208 grain running 2,400. Okay. The Warner Tool Company Flatline has a higher ballistic coefficient. Even though it's a lighter bullet, it can go a little faster. It flies quite a bit flatter, which we're about to look into. So at 1,230 yards for this round, I did some math over here for you. So at 1,230, we would pick 1,200, we'd say 37.4 minutes, and at 1,300, 43.5. Okay, so we do the same type of interpolation. We find the difference between the two, which was 6.1, and then we would either multiply by 0.3 to get 1.83 or multiply it by 0.7 to get 4.27, and we can either add that to the 37.4 or subtract the 4.27 from the 43.5. We're going to get the same result either way, doesn't matter. And so supposedly at 1,230 yards I need 39.25 minutes of angle, basically. So 39.23. When I shot using that information, I actually hit high. I did. I was shooting over the target. So I had to back it down a little bit. And I ended up at 36.5 minutes to get on that 1,230 yard target with the Warner FLATLINE. So that was interesting. I was shooting, yeah, roughly 2.73 minutes of angle high. And if you do the math, that's almost 3 feet per the minute of angle thing, you know. 2.93 feet. If you want to do the math on that, it's easy. You take 12.3, multiply it by 1.047. You'll get the exact inches doing it that way, and then you would divide that by 12 inches in a foot, and you'll get 2.93 feet. Alright, so I was actually shooting high with the Horner Tool Company at the 1,230 yards. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I've actually not had that happen before, where I built a drop chart and needed to dial back elevation to hit a target. Usually, like 99% of the time, I end up having to add just a little bit. Doesn't matter what bullet I'm using, but this is the first time using the Warner Tool Company FLATLINEs, and it was actually really surprising to me that I actually had to dial it back to hit that target because I was shooting over the top of it. Alright, so now we're going to get into the 1 mile shot, and actually it was 1,798 yards was how far that target was. Verified using GPS and my Vortex Razor 4,000 yard rangefinder. So, I did not even attempt to shoot this thing with the Hornady bullets because they're so far off at 1,200 yards, like 6.8 minutes of angle at that distance. They're so far off at that distance already that I was not going to even attempt, because it would be really hard in the conditions we were shooting in to even figure out where the bullets were hitting so we could make a correct adjustment to get onto target. Because I'm gonna venture to say that it would probably, like, versus the drop chart, those bullets would be hitting like 20 or even 30 feet low. Like, they'd be that far off the target. And that's how far my drop chart would be off at that range. So, like, if you're off by this much at 1,200 yards, you know, it only exponentially gets worse from there. So, yeah, back to the Warner Tool Company bullets for 1,798 yards. At 1,800 on the chart, it says I need 82.1. And at 1,700, it says 73.2. So we do our interpolation. The difference is 8.9. And we're shooting 98% of the way to the target. So if you want to do that, you could do 73.2 plus 98% of 8.9, which would give you 8.72. So 81.92 is what it should have taken to get to the target. So, and you can't dial 81.92 minutes, so you would dial 82 minutes is what you would dial. And then you would just kind of hold a little different. But, so and what it took was actually 84, so 2 minutes off. 84 minus 82 is 2 MOA. At that range, you would take 2. Well, you would take 17.98, multiply it by 1.047. And that would tell you exactly how many inches, and then you would divide that by 12 inches to get 3.14 feet low. So, based on my dope at that range, I was only off by 3 feet at almost 1,800 yards with the Warner Tool Company. So, I actually missed the target less with the Warner Tool Company bullet at both 1,230 and at 1,798 than I did with the Hornady. So, in my opinion, when you miss less, and at least if you only miss by a little bit, it's a whole lot easier to figure out what's going on, and a whole lot easier to actually get on target, you know. And we saw that. That's exactly what happened. It was just easier to hit the target with a, arguably, and this sample size of one, me, on that day, it's easier to hit the target when you've got a better projectile that actually is true to its ballistic coefficient or really damn close to it, versus using an inferior projectile that has an overinflated ballistic coefficient and is not true at all. And so, or not even close to being true, because like we saw how this one performed. It outperformed at 1200 by a little bit, and it underperformed at 1800. So what would we do? We would just adjust the chart just a little bit. This thing has a ballistic coefficient of 0.712, and I believe, if I'm not wrong, well, I'm not gonna make any claims, but I'm thinking the 208 grain Hornady is claimed to be close to that as well. Not 100% sure, but there you go. Now the difference in cost. These bullets right here, once you ship them and pay tax on them, they are about $2 a piece. So that's if money is an issue and you care about how much you're spending on bullets versus the results you're getting, maybe don't buy those, because the Hornadys, the 208 grains, I believe I can go to Sportsman's Warehouse, which is probably not the cheapest place to buy them, but I can go to Sportsman's Warehouse and I can buy a box of these 208 grain ELD match bullets, and I think they're about $60 plus tax. So about half about half the cost of these. These are about $100 for 50 of them. I can get 100 of those for $60 plus tax. So yeah, less than half the cost, basically. But that's what I've got going on. Now, moving into the future, kind of my motivation on this rifle to change, I've already put it in the Outlier chassis, but to go to a different barrel, go to this Outlier barrel, this heavier barrel, is to reduce the harmonics as much as possible, because that barrel is so short and so big around that I think, the harmonic, at least the peaks of the sinusoidal waves and stuff like that, are going to be lower in this barrel than they are in this one. Even though this one's a fairly heavy duty barrel too, it's definitely not a hunting contour, but there's quite a bit more steel in this one. And also, this is a 1-in-8 twist, where the factory barrel is a 1-in-10. And so my goal is to try out the Warner FLATLINE 198 grain. So the 198 grain is a 0.836 G1 ballistic coefficient. So it's significantly higher ballistic coefficient than even the 180. And the last time I shot a bullet that had a 0.8 plus ballistic coefficient, I was shooting a 300 grain burger of my 338 Lapua. But now, with the 1-in-8 twist, I can run one that has a similar ballistic coefficient out of a 308 and a 30 cal, which is nuts. Because if I run at the same speed as the 208 grain at around 2400, my sonic barrier actually, instead of it being for that one, instead of it being about 1600 yards, it's actually over 2000. It's like about 2070, or maybe close to 2100 yards is where the sonic barrier moves to, which gets me past my 1 mile target, So I'm not shooting through the sonic barrier to hit that 1 mile target, you know what I'm saying? And so that can only help with the stability, and it can only help with, increasing the chance of hitting the target. So these are things I just kind of wanted to go over with you guys today. And yeah, Warner Tool Company for the win. Hornady, I shoot a lot of Hornady bullets, but man, when it really counts and you're really trying to get out there, I'd rather not have to come back and make corrections on my dope chart and be like, hey, okay, this thing's way off on its ballistic coefficient that's advertised, and I have to build a custom chart because of that. I don't want to have to do that. The biggest chances are, if I adjust my chart to give me 6.8 minutes of angle at 1230 yards, or like adjust it to where that's what I'm actually shooting, to where it's 56 at 1230 instead of 49, what's going to happen is that at closer range, I'm going to be shooting over the target by quite a lot. You know, I'm going to be missing higher more often. Yeah. So, anyways, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time in the next video.